Hi YouTube. For as long as I can remember, I've had a fascination for tiny computers. It probably stems from the Atari portfolio from Terminator 2 or the mid to late 90s PDA craze. I've talked in other videos about my love of Windows CE handheld PCs and how, for a 14-year-old me, having a touchscreen computer in my pocket was just the coolest thing ever. Unfortunately, that 14-year-old me could never afford the later colour handheld PCs or Toshiba Libretto laptops, but since then, any small or tiny form factor computer seems to grab my attention. So today, we're of course going to talk about the Mac Mini. I've had a number of these machines over the years, starting with the original G4 Mac Mini released in 2005. At the time in the UK, we only had one Apple store, which was the Apple Store on Regent Street in London. I lived about an hour and a half away, so I got up early on release day and got the train down. I stood in the queue with other excited people and chatted about which one I was going to get and why I was going to get one. So why did I want one? Well, it was a tiny Apple computer, and it was at a price I could afford, either £329 or £399. Initially, I was going to get the lower end spec, with a 1.25 GHz G4 and a smaller hard drive, then buy the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi upgrade, as this was an optional extra. The sales assistant advised me that they didn't have any of these upgrades on that day, but it could be purchased at a separate date in the future. I therefore decided to spend the extra on the faster Mac Mini and handed over my money, and off I went. All Mac Minis until the mid-2010 release had an external power brick. While annoying, this helped keep the size of the computer small. If you're wondering how small it actually is, here it is compared to the original Apple TV, which has a form factor similar to the current generation M1 Mac Mini. Now the eagle-eyed amongst you will probably be screaming at the screen or frantically scrolling down to the comments section to tell me, "That's not a G4 Mac Mini!" Well, you are correct. The G4 Mac Mini and the 2006 Intel release are almost identical, save for one small thing: an IR sensor to the right hand side of the slot loading optical drive. I have a G4 Mac Mini somewhere in a box, but aside from upgrading the hard drive and RAM, you can't do much with it, and as it's PowerPC, it's limited to only being able to run macOS 10 10.5 Leopard. Let's turn it around and see what ports are available. Starting from left to right, we have the power button, power in, 10, 100 and gigabit Ethernet, a single FireWire 400 port, a DVI port which was capable of digital and analog video, 4 USB 2.0 ports, above which we have a Kensington lock, a 3.5mm audio in and audio out. Quite a decent complement considering the size and price. Apple AirPort and Bluetooth were built into these machines rather than it being a build-to-order option or later purchase. On the G4 Mac Mini, only Apple would install this part and charge labour on top of the part price. Included in the box was a DVI to VGA adapter such as this one. With the release of the Intel Macs, Apple dropped support for the internal modem, but offered an external USB one should one be required. Considering this machine was released a mere 12 months or so after the G4, it's miles apart in terms of performance. I was slightly disappointed at my original Mac Mini. Despite having a 32MB dedicated graphics card, the UI of macOS 10 felt sluggish. The 4200 RPM hard drive didn't help with matters either. What was also disappointing was macOS 10 10.4 Tiger included a new video codec, which is ubiquitous today but quite revolutionary at the time, allowing HD video at the same bitrate as DVD. This of course was the H.264 codec, and I was all about HD in the mid-2000s. Unfortunately, the experience was not smooth and the G4 struggled to decode high bitrate videos. The fans would ramp up and would get rather noisy. The Intel Macs, however, managed impressive frame rates and kept the fans in check. The whole UI felt buttery smooth and included fancy graphical animations when adding widgets to dashboard. I had Mac Mini envy. So what's special about this Mac Mini in particular? Well, this one is one of the very first Intel Macs, and it runs on an Intel Core Solo CPU. This wasn't around for very long and was replaced by the Core Duo models. What's nice about these machines is that the hard disk is a SATA drive and can be replaced with a more modern SSD. The G4 Mac Minis used IDE. These Mac Minis now had 2 SODIMM memory sockets, allowing for greater RAM capacities to be installed. The CPU is socketed, unlike the G4, and could be upgraded. The 1.5 single-core Core Solo in this Mac Mini can be upgraded to a whopping 2.13 GHz Core 2 Duo. That's over 600 more megahertz and twice as many cores. I think it's time to start the upgrades. Here I've got a 1.83 GHz Intel Core Duo from another Mac Mini I had going spare. Two 1GB sticks of RAM maxing it out to the official amount supported, and a Samsung Evo 840 120GB SATA SSD. Getting inside the Mac Mini requires a lot of patience, and you're going to scuff up the case a little in your first attempt. These machines were never designed to be opened by consumers, but when did that stop people wanting to see inside things? Using the correct tool as per the service manual, a metal putty knife, or an IKEA table knife if you don't have one to hand. This should be inserted between the plastic of the base and the metal of the case. Gently pushing it in and unclipping the clips from left, front to right will free the base and everything attached. The first time you do this is honestly one of the most nerve-wracking experiences you can imagine. Every fibre of your being is telling you, no, this isn't how you get inside a computer, you're going to break something, quit whilst you're ahead. But a little perseverance gets you inside, and that's where the fun begins. The optical and hard drive sit in a caddy at the top of the system. There are just 4 screws hidden inside the caddy at each corner which must be removed. Bear in mind that if you're going to do this, you're going to need a thin screwdriver, as one of the screws is a little tricky to get to. I'd also recommend a magnetised screwdriver to ease the retrieval of the screws. To gain access to one, the Wi-Fi antenna board needs to be unclipped. Squeezing in the legs beneath it will free it with a satisfying popping motion, and then from there the ribbon cable that connects the optical and hard drives to an interconnect board need to be removed. Pushing up on each side of the connector should unlock it and the ribbon cable can be pulled free. We now have access to the RAM and we can see the CPU cooler. If all you wanted to do was upgrade the RAM, this is as far as the disassembly would need to be taken. However, to upgrade the CPU, we're going to need to remove the system board to gain access to the clips that hold down the CPU cooler. To remove the system board, there's a standoff which needs to be unscrewed, and once removed the system board can be wiggled out of the bottom case. 4 plastic clips at each corner of the cooler need to be carefully compressed and pushed through their hole in the system board. This plastic is fragile and has a habit of breaking. Try doing this with fingers and not a tool, as this may help reduce any damage. Carefully remove the CPU cooler, but remember there's a temperature sensor glued to the underside with a cable going to the system board. Snap this and the fans will always go at full tilt. A flathead screwdriver can then be used to free the CPU from its socket. Reassembly is a simple matter of replacing the CPU, ensuring that you apply fresh thermal compound before replacing the CPU cooler. The plastic clips should push through the holes in the system board and snap back into place. The system board can then be wiggled back into the case and the standoff replaced, the optical and hard drive caddy reinserted and screwed in, the ribbon cable reconnected to the interconnect board, and then the case can be closed up. I won't show the process of swapping over the hard drive to an SSD, as there's a great guide on iFixit. A link is in the description. Well, it chimes, which means I haven't broken it, and the RAM upgrade has worked too. But what version of macOS 10 am I going to install? Well, I have a very specific use case scenario for this Mac Mini, and it's to help idle me and my retro Macs. Currently, the Mac Mini that I'm using as a bridge between the modern world and my old Macs is running macOS 10.5 Leopard, which is all well and good, but doesn't show up in the chooser. I have to click a button and enter an IP address, whereas I'm lazy and I want to make this process quicker. You can do this with Tiger. Apple never shipped a retail version of Tiger for Intel. Each machine came with a machine-specific DVD installer, which I unfortunately didn't have, until I came across an archive copy on archive.org. Rather than write this to a blank DVD because it's slow and boring, I wrote it out to an external 2.5-inch SATA hard drive that I can connect to the Mac Mini using a SATA to USB cable. Once I've successfully plugged in the USB cable on the 3rd attempt, the Mac Mini detects the external drive and begins to boot from it. And after a few moments you're asked which language you wish to start the installer in. Now I'm all for a challenge, but I think we'll stick with English in this instance. Why did I choose an off-the-shelf solution and not another flash-based media option? Well, flash media is great for older operating systems, such as Windows 95 or 98 or classic Mac OS. but the virtual memory management system in macOS X quickly degrades flash media such as compact flash or SD cards. Also, in the case of compact flash, they're still quite expensive for their capacity. The Samsung Evo drive that I put in here was £8 on eBay, and it's 120GB in size. Also, as this version of macOS is so old, it doesn't support features such as trim, and therefore may furthermore reduce the lifespan of flash media. Modern SSDs include built-in garbage collection to ensure they keep the drive healthy and maintain its longevity. Making a bootable macOS X installer is relatively easy and just requires an empty drive, a disk image and disk utility. Disk utility works its magic, and after about 10 minutes or so you'll have a nice quick bootable installer. You could use a USB memory stick, but I found hard drives to be much faster. Installation on this Mac Mini took just over 3 minutes, and I can't emphasize how fast SSDs make these old machines. And for their price, I can't recommend them highly enough. If you have a machine that uses IDE, then my suggestion to you is to buy an IDE to mSATA adapter, then buy an mSATA SSD and use that. Yes, you won't get the full throughput of the bus as it's still only IDE, but it will give your old machine many more years of use, and feel snappier, much like Safari does on a new iOS update. The price of an adapter is about £9, and a 64GB mSATA SSD is about £10, which combined is over double the price I paid for this SSD, but it's worth the investment. You may also need to factor in a 2.5 to 3.5 inch adapter if you plan on using this solution on a desktop. Apple is still providing software updates for macOS X 10.4 Tiger. I'll install all the updates as the installer only installed macOS X 10.4.7. 10.4.11 was the final release of Tiger. Let's do a boot speed test to let the SSD stretch its legs. From a cold boot to a fully loaded desktop takes just under 13 seconds. This still boggles my mind for a 16-year-old machine and just goes to show what a massive difference an SSD can make. So I mentioned before that I have a very unique use case for this Mac Mini, so let's switch over to the iBook and see if all this work was worth it. If I open up the chooser and click on Apple Talk, Tiger Mini, which is a play on the name Tiger Lily from Peter Pan, shows up in the list of available servers. From here I can click OK and type in my username and password. Whilst this might seem like a lot of work to not have to enter an IP address, when you play with lots of retro machines, this will save me quite a bit of time in the future. The volume mounts on the desktop as expected, and we can traverse the file system. I can of course still click the server address button in the chooser and enter the IP address of my Leopard Mac Mini, but it's nice to see Tiger advertised how classic Macs used to show. There is a ton of resources regarding classic Mac networking on applefool.com, and it's a great resource, not just for the niche stuff in this video but more generally. A link is in the description. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one.